For Arthur, silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was filled with the whisper of the wind moving through the Douglas firs, the distant rumble of falling stones in the canyon, and the rhythmic crunch of his boots on the frost-hardened earth. At 68, Arthur had spent more years of his life in the company of trees than of people. As a retired forest ranger, he knew the Rocky Mountains not as a map, but as an old friend, one that was beautiful, moody, and occasionally dangerous. His cabin sat perched on a ridge overlooking the Silver Valley. It was a sturdy structure of rough-hewn logs, built to withstand the heavy snows that would soon bury the world in white. But for now, it was late autumn. The air was crisp and tasted of iron and pine needles. The sky was a piercing, impossible blue. Arthur stood on his porch, wrapping his calloused hands around a steaming mug of black coffee. He took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill his lungs. This was his church. This was his peace. He didn't miss the noise of the city, the traffic, or the endless chatter of television screens. Up here, time didn't tick away. It flowed, slow and steady like the river below. He set his mug down and picked up his binoculars. Old habits died hard. Even though he was retired, he still scanned the horizon every morning, checking for smoke, for injured wildlife, for anything out of place. He swept the lenses across the jagged granite peaks. Nothing but gray rock and blue sky. He lowered the glasses, ready to start his morning chores. Scree! The sound tore through the silence like a knife. It wasn't the usual call of a hawk or a raven. It was a high-pitched, desperate shriek that echoed off the canyon walls, followed by a sickening thud and the sound of tumbling loose rocks. Arthur froze. His instincts, sharpened by 40 years in the service, kicked in instantly. That sound came from the shadowed ravine about 300 yards to the east. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his heavy canvas jacket and his walking stick. He moved with a speed that belied his age, navigating the treacherous, rocky path with practiced ease. As he descended into the ravine, the air grew colder, trapped in the shadows of the cliffs. He stopped, listening. Silence had returned. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was heavy, waiting. "Hello," Arthur called out, though he knew no human could have made that sound. He rounded a large boulder and stopped dead in his tracks. There, lying on a bed of sharp shale, was a mass of dark brown feathers. One wing was spread out at an unnatural angle, twisted and broken. But it was the head that caught Arthur's breath. Pure, brilliant white. It was a bald eagle, the king of the skies. The bird was massive, its talons the size of a human hand. It was lying on its side, panting heavily, its yellow beak open in silent agony. As Arthur took a cautious step forward, the eagle's head snapped toward him. Its eyes were fierce, golden, and burning with a wild, terrifying intelligence. Even broken, even dying, it looked regal. It hissed at Arthur, a warning that said, "Come no closer, or I will take you with me." Arthur stood still, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked up at the cliff face above. The bird must have been caught in a downdraft or struck by a falling rock. Without help, the coyotes would find it by nightfall. Arthur looked into the fierce golden eyes of the fallen king. "All right," he whispered softly, his voice low and steady. "I'm not going to hurt you. But we can't stay here." The standoff in the canyon lasted for what felt like an hour, though it was likely only minutes. The eagle watched Arthur with unblinking hostility. Every time Arthur shifted his weight, the bird's good wing flared out, and its talons, sharp enough to crush a rabbit's skull, flexed against the rocks. Arthur knew he had to be fast, and he had to be careful. One wrong move, and he'd lose a finger. Or an eye. He slowly unzipped his heavy canvas jacket. The cold mountain air bit through his flannel shirt, but he ignored it. He needed a net, and the jacket was the only thing he had. "Easy now," Arthur murmured, keeping his voice a low, steady drone. "I'm just a guest here." He took a step. The eagle hissed, a guttural sound from deep in its throat. It lunged, its beak snapping shut inches from Arthur's shin. Arthur didn't flinch. He waited for the bird to pull back, to reset its balance. Now, in one fluid motion, Arthur cast the heavy jacket over the eagle like a fisherman casting a net. The bird erupted in a frenzy of thrashing feathers and muffled screeches. Arthur dropped to his knees, using his forearms to pin the edges of the jacket down, careful not to put his weight on the fragile hollow bones of the bird. I know. Arthur grunted, wrestling with the bundle. It's dark. It's scary. But it's the only way. Slowly, the thrashing stopped. Darkness had done its trick. Deprived of sight, the eagle's instinct to fight subsided into a tense paralysis. Arthur scooped the bundle up into his arms. It was heavier than he expected, solid muscle and raw power wrapped in canvas. The climb back up to the cabin was brutal. Arthur's lungs burned, and his arms ached. But he held the bird close to his chest, shielding it from the wind. Inside the cabin, the warmth of the wood stove was a welcome relief. Arthur cleared his kitchen table and laid the bundle down. He gathered his supplies: warm water, antiseptic, and strips of clean cotton cloth. He also grabbed 2 smooth sticks of cedar he had whittled the day before. He peeled back the jacket. The eagle lay still, exhausted, its chest heaving. Arthur worked quickly. He was no veterinarian, but he had splinted enough broken legs in his time to know the mechanics of bone and muscle. He cleaned the wound on the wing. The bird flinched but didn't strike. Perhaps it was too weak, or perhaps, on some primal level, it sensed that these rough hands were trying to mend, not harm. Arthur aligned the broken bones, placing the cedar sticks on either side, and wrapped the wing tight against the bird's body to immobilize it. There, Arthur whispered, tying the final knot. That's the best I can do. He stepped back and poured some water into a shallow dish, placing it near the bird's beak. The eagle didn't drink. It just watched him. The fierce gold in its eyes hadn't dimmed, but the panic was gone. It looked at Arthur with a profound, terrifying dignity. You don't belong on a kitchen table, do you? Arthur said, leaning back in his chair, lighting his pipe. The smoke curled up towards the rafters. You belong up there, in the clouds. He looked at the bird, then at the window where the first flakes of a new snow were beginning to fall. I'll call you Sky, Arthur said softly, because that's where you're going back to. I promise. Sky blinked once, slowly, as if sealing the pact. Winter in the Rockies is a jealous lover. It locks you in and demands all your attention. The snow didn't just fall. It piled up in drifts as high as the cabin roof, burying the world in a silence so deep it felt like the bottom of the ocean. For 3 months, Arthur and Sky were the only 2 living souls in that white universe. At first, the truce was fragile. Sky spent his days perched on the back of an old wooden chair Arthur had reinforced with leather. He watched Arthur with suspicious, narrowing eyes. When Arthur approached with strips of raw trout or venison, Sky would snap the food from his fingers with a speed that made Arthur jump. It was a transaction, not a friendship. But time has a way of softening even the wildest hearts. As the blizzards raged outside, rattling the window panes, the cabin became a sanctuary. Arthur fell into a routine. He would sit by the fire in the evenings, whittling wood or mending his gear, and he started to talk. He didn't talk to himself. He talked to Sky. You know, you're lucky you don't have to pay taxes, Arthur chuckled one evening, tossing a piece of jerky toward the bird. Or deal with politicians. Up here, it's just the wind and the law of gravity. Sky tilted his head, his golden eyes fixing on Arthur's moving lips. He seemed to be listening. Arthur told him about the war, stories he hadn't told anyone in 40 years. He spoke of the noise, the mud, and the friends who didn't come back. He told him about Martha, his wife, how she smelled like lavender and how the house felt like a tomb after she died. I thought I came up here to die, too, Sky, Arthur confessed one night, staring into the dying embers. I thought if I just got far enough away from the world, the memories would stop chasing me. He looked over at the eagle. Sky wasn't eating. He was just watching, his feathers ruffled against the cold drafts. For the first time, the bird didn't look like a predator. He looked like a companion. One particularly cold morning in February, Arthur woke up to find the fire out. Shivering, he went to restoke it. He felt a weight on his shoulder. He froze. Sky had hopped down from his perch. He wasn't attacking. He was simply standing close to Arthur, seeking the warmth of another living body. Arthur slowly reached out a hand. He didn't wear the thick leather glove this time. He held his bare, trembling hand inches from the eagle's chest. Sky didn't hiss. He didn't strike. He simply fluffed his feathers and settled down. In that moment, Arthur realized something profound. He had spent the winter thinking he was saving this bird. He was fixing its wing, feeding it, keeping it alive. But as the morning sun broke through the frost-covered window, illuminating the majestic creature sitting calmly beside him, Arthur knew the truth. He wasn't just healing the eagle. The eagle was healing him. The silence of the cabin wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with a quiet understanding, a pact between two old warriors who had both fallen from the sky, helping each other find the strength to fly again. Spring arrived in the Rockies not with a whisper, but with a roar. The ice on the river cracked and broke, sending rushing water thundering down the valley. The gray world turned into a vibrant explosion of green. Wildflowers pushed through the thawing earth, painting the slopes in purple and yellow. Inside the cabin, Sky was restless. He paced back and forth on his perch, his wings flexing, testing the air. The bandage had been off for 2 weeks. Arthur had watched him fly short distances from the porch to the pine tree and back. The wing held. The bone had knit together strong and true. Arthur knew what time it was. He had dreaded this day since the first snow fell. "It's time, isn't it?" Arthur asked, pouring the last of his morning coffee into the sink. He didn't have the appetite for it. Sky looked at him, dipping his head. The call of the wild was vibrating through the bird's body. He was a creature of the wind, and a cage made of kindness was still a cage. Arthur put on his jacket, the same one he had used to capture Sky months ago. He extended his arm, covered in the heavy leather glove. Sky hopped onto it, his talons gripping firmly. He was heavy, solid, and magnificent. They hiked up the trail behind the cabin, climbing higher than they ever had before. Arthur's breath came in short gasps, but he didn't stop until they reached the Devil's Pulpit, a granite ledge that jutted out over the valley, offering a sheer drop of 2,000 feet. The wind-up here was fierce. It whipped Arthur's hair and ruffled Sky's feathers. The eagle spread his wings. 7 feet of dark brown and white majesty. He felt the updraft, the invisible elevator to the heavens. Arthur looked into the bird's eyes one last time. "Go on," Arthur whispered, his voice cracking slightly. "You don't belong to me, Sky. You belong to that." He nodded toward the endless blue horizon. He thrust his arm upward. For a heartbeat, Sky hesitated. He gripped the glove tighter, as if saying goodbye. Then he pushed off. Gravity seemed to lose its hold. Sky dropped for a split second, terrifyingly fast, before the wind caught him. His massive wings locked into place. He didn't flap. He soared. He rocketed upward, riding the thermal currents, turning into a silhouette against the sun. Arthur stood rooted to the spot, shielding his eyes. A tear, cold and sharp, traced a line down his weathered cheek. He felt a sudden, sharp emptiness in his chest, the pain of losing a friend. But then, a high, piercing scream echoed across the valley. "Scree!" Arthur looked up. Sky hadn't flown away yet. He was circling. He banked left, diving down and sweeping past the cliff edge one last time, close enough that Arthur could feel the wind from his wings. It was a salute, a thank you. Then, the eagle turned west, climbing higher and higher until he was nothing more than a speck of dust in the vastness of the sky. Arthur took a deep breath. The mountain air filled his lungs, cleaner and sweeter than it had ever tasted. He was alone again, but as he looked out over the world, he realized he wasn't lonely. He had learned the hardest lesson of love. Holding on is instinct, but letting go is true strength. "Fly high, brother," Arthur whispered to the empty sky. He turned and began the long walk back to the cabin. His step was lighter. Winter was over, and for the first time in a long time, Arthur felt ready for spring.